learn from. The internet is full of them.
I didn't take a single class in film school. All we had were small DSLR cameras in our hands.
I really don't think school is the best for you.
It's unnecessary and a waste of money. The next Spielberg isn't coming from film school.
Film school might not be the best option.
Yeah, don't go to film school.
That's right, don't go to film school.
I'll go anyway. This is my bachelor's degree. It was a cold, rainy, grey day in September, and I was on my way to university to take my final exam. My heart was beating. My hands were sweating, but I was ready. And so, a couple hours later, I came out of that university as a new person. A young man with a bachelor's degree. Guys, the lights. I'm just kidding, this isn't my bachelor's degree, but I did actually have that test in September and I did pass it and receive my bachelor's degree, just I haven't received my physical certificate yet. Anyway, in this video I want to talk about my experience studying film and share some thoughts that I think are important for people who are still deciding whether to study or not to study. To start off this video, I think it is important that I more precisely explain what I studied to give you the right context, and I imagine it could be beneficial to you to know what kind of stuff is being taught in different schools. Also, I didn't really study film, but kind of did. The study is called multimedia art, and the name says it all actually. You learn various forms of art in the multimedia dimension. Once you take a closer look at the study, you will find out that they differentiate between 4 directions of art that they teach: design, animation, especially 3D, audio, especially digital music production, and lastly, film. Their model is that students begin with all 4 and gradually select their focus. So in my case, I was introduced to all but then focused on filmmaking. Therefore, it's easiest to simply say that I studied film. I want to mention, however, that this also includes photography, which as an important part of film was also of significance in my studies, but also studying film, of course, had a great impact on my photographic work. Now, before discussing the arguments, I think it would be beneficial to specify what I was taught and how the program went for me, but if you're not interested in this, feel free to skip via the chapters on YouTube. Alright, so beginning in first semester, I of course had all 4 artistic directions. However, I remember that the first semester felt quite heavy on design. I learned the basics of graphic design in the practical sense, but also in the theoretical sense, so that includes things such as color theory or composition. I still have all the projects saved somewhere on my hard drive, and so check this out. This was one of my design assignments. We had to record a sound and then make a design that represented that sound, and here are 2 variations of my design, and I have to say I still quite like them actually, but I remember that my professor, she was not so happy with them. I was taught the basics in 3D animation. Well, not animation actually, because before you can animate a 3D object, you need to create the 3D object. And that is what we spent most of our time learning as far as I remember. This is the last project I made for 3D class. The assignment was to make a Western scene, and this is what I made. And I think for a beginner, it isn't even too bad. I mean, there were some other beginners who were much better than this, but for me, I was semi-proud of this. I think the scene really isn't too bad, and I even built in some details like this joke poster, you could say. It's a wanted sign for my professor. I don't know, I think it's a funny scene. In the audio department, we learned the basics of sound, so that means frequencies, decibels, etc., and we were introduced to both software and hardware, so we discussed the workings of a DAW, but also the different types of microphones and how they work. I have to say, this semester of audio was quite technical. So audio was always really fun. Most of the time in the practical classes I was just trying to make some music, but we also once got the assignment to make a radio commercial. Here's the last bit of it.
Bose, where sound comes alive.
Yeah, it's a radio commercial. But somewhere deep in a folder, I found a techno track which I made back then, and I think it was the project I handed in as the final project for the semester, and I still think it goes pretty hard actually. Lastly, in film, which at the time was already what I had identified as the category I want to focus on in the future, we learned the basics of telling a story visually and the technical basics, so that means learning angles and different ways of framing a person and stuff like that. I actually made a video on that semester's project, which some of you who have been here for a bit longer might remember. We got together in groups to make a short documentary, and my team made one about a local hat maker. You can still watch it on the channel.
Bei allen Arbeitsschritten eigentlich noch der Zeit rein.
Aside from that, there are two things that I find worth mentioning. Firstly, we also had a photography class which was considered relevant for all the visual studies, so everything except for audio, I suppose. And this class was also aimed at the beginners, so we learned stuff like composition and camera settings and so on. Secondly, we had many theoretical classes that didn't directly relate to one specific category of art, but was applicable to art in the broader sense. So these were classes such as concept creation, aesthetics and art history, cultural studies, or an introduction to sociology. This theoretical part actually took up about half of the study's time. Then, in the second semester, we continued in a similar fashion, just that I had chosen 2 of the 4 artistic directions which I want to continue. I chose film and audio, so that means no more design or 3D animation for me. The content was becoming a bit more in-depth now that the beginners had learned the basics in the first semester. If I remember correctly, in film we were learning stuff like the basics of storytelling and the history of cinema. I think we also had more classes in the technical aspects, such as lighting. In audio, we went quite in-depth beyond what I was able to process and understand at times, but I still thoroughly enjoyed it. We had a class dedicated to sound design in film, and we had to recreate the entire audio of a scene from a film or a show of our choice. And I remember that I chose an episode of The Mandalorian to recreate. Something really cool which I enjoyed a lot was a class I took called Staged Photography, in which I made this project called Masking Materials. I actually made extensive behind the scenes on this project, but it's been a while back and I'm considering to remake those videos because I still like the outcome of the project. So let me know if that is of interest to you. Then, from the third semester onwards, I was fully focused on studying film, and we had classes in directing, writing, editing, VFX, lighting, and other stuff. However, I should mention that this sounds like a lot, but it was actually kind of underwhelming. Many friends from uni and myself agreed that a lot of these classes were just a bit too surface level or simply too short. In this semester, I also took another photography class. This time it was documentary photography, and I made this project called Tail Numbers and Flight Logs about the community of plane spotters in my hometown. Anyway, the rest of the studies was just more classes in film and more classes in the theoretical broader subject, and also we worked on film projects. A point I would like to emphasize is that my studies were less of a technical study actually, and more theoretical, which might have not quite come across yet because I spoke more about the technical classes than the theoretical classes. But therefore I really want to underline here that my studies were quite concentrated on the theory of art itself actually, and not so much on the technical aspects of it. Anyway, I think that is a pretty good summary of what this study was, which should give you a better understanding and some context for the following part of this video, in which I want to discuss whether it was worth it or not. Alright, I need to voice some disclaimers here. You need to know I live in Austria and my uni is also here. That means I didn't pay much for this education, which I think is a very significant point to consider, especially if you're from the US, which I think is the best known example for a country with a student debt crisis. Austrians have the possibility to study basically for free. As a British citizen, I have to pay a fee, but that fee is nothing in comparison to studying in the US. Actually, according to what my mum has told me, I think Japan is also really expensive, and I'm sure there are many more countries with this issue. I want to mention this for, again, context, because the cost factor surely would have impacted my decision immensely. And that brings me to the arguments against going to art school. Let's call it art school because I think this applies to many forms of art. The main point that is being communicated here is that you're spending your time and money on a study to learn stuff you could teach yourself for free. In times of YouTube and other online platforms with tutorials everywhere, it is magnificently easy to learn skills online for free. Especially in countries with high education costs, the point made is that once you come out of your studies, you're probably in debt and then have to find your way into the industry. Whereas if you decide to teach yourself, you can use additional time to already find your way into the industry and just learn by doing, and then in the end you don't have debt and you're already in the industry. So in practice, this can be, for example, 1 year of learning photography by yourself and then spending the next 2 years still improving your craft, but already finding small jobs and freelance gigs to learn by doing. Put simply, I think the fundamental point made here is that to learn photography or filmmaking, formal education is not absolutely necessary and hence not worth paying for. But now I would like to make my point on why I think studying the arts in a formal manner has an entirely different impact on you, that it can certainly be worth the time. I can't speak on behalf of the cost though. I believe, as an autodidact, when you relinquish the formal education, that also restrains you within your bias, or your bubble one could say. And the key difference is that when learning by yourself, you decide what you want to learn and then scout the internet for tutorials or classes on that specific subject. I don't mean the broad subject such as photography, I mean more in-depth things such as using lighting as a storytelling tool in photography or something like that. In uni, on the other hand, you are given subjects to study, which will inevitably lead to you finding things you never would have found yourself. At least that was the case for me. I totally consider myself an autodidact, yet I deeply appreciate the range of subjects that I was introduced to in my studies, because that included a lot of things that I think I never would have come across if I were just doing my own thing and teaching myself. Uni is the main reason I've become interested in writers on photography and photo theory in general, which made me realize that photography is so much more than a technical craft. This way of learning, by having your horizon expanded by external factors, also applies to the people you meet. When learning by yourself, you are not likely to just find people that are doing the same thing as you, except you intentionally go out there and look for those connections. And this is totally possible, but it is very dependent on your personality, I would say. So me, for example, I tend to be more of an introverted person, and I don't really see myself going out there that much to look for these connections. So I think I have an easier time finding these connections naturally in uni. In uni, you are thrown together with a bunch of mostly like-minded yet unique people. And in my case at least, we had to work in groups for various assignments, and this whole process of getting to know each other became much easier. The experience I had is that the people I got to know were like-minded on a base level, meaning they were also looking for their path in the world of being creative or being an artist. But that was about it with the similarities. In other aspects, each person was so unique and brought new perspectives and methods into my life and inspired me in different ways. Not only that, but one huge benefit of being in a group like this is that we all helped each other out on our bigger projects, which all could have never been realized without the team. So in April of 2021, for example, I shot a 30-minute short film with a crew of 15 to 20 people. And only a couple months ago, I shot my final project for uni, again with a crew made up of friends from uni. And as you might have seen on Instagram or sometimes here on YouTube, I've helped out my friends on their productions. So we just help each other out to bring our visions to reality, which I imagine to be much harder when you're not in uni. So, was it worth it? For me, it was 100% worth it. I loved it and I will be missing it, and it has not taught me much of the technical aspects which I can teach myself. Instead, it has taught me concepts and ways of being and thinking. This is a point the uni itself stressed a lot when explaining their program. They know that nowadays we can easily teach ourselves these technical aspects online, and therefore they want to concentrate on teaching us a way of thinking and creating. A professor of mine actually once put it quite boldly. He said, "We want you to leave uni as artists, not as technicians." And so that is why I think it was worth it for me. However, if I were in the US and I had to pay thousands of dollars to do this, I am very unsure whether my opinion would be the same. I know too little about the system in the US and how hard or easy it is to pay off your debt once you're done studying, but the idea of entering the workforce being in heavy debt certainly doesn't appeal to me. And especially in this practical field of work, a degree isn't as important as in other fields. Many companies will take you in for your work, not your degree. And if you plan on doing freelance work, that is all the more true. For me, uni was a huge enrichment for myself, my personality, and my artistic knowledge. So that leads me to think that maybe, let's say you want to be a freelance commercial photographer, which I think we can say is more of a technical job. You probably don't need to go to uni because you can teach yourself all those technical aspects. But let's say on the other hand you want to be more of a conceptual, artistic photographer. In that case, I'm sure it's not necessary to go to uni, but maybe it's worth it. But I really don't know. It's hard to say. Is going abroad a thing to do, maybe to avoid the brutal costs of studying? I'm not sure. I'd be really interested to know your thoughts, so if you have anything you'd like to share, just leave them in the comments. The cost in some countries makes this a terrible balancing act and a very hard decision to make. But speaking from my experience, the content I was taught was worth the effort. So I guess you need to decide whether you are studying for a degree, in which case I think it's probably not worth it, or if you're studying for the knowledge and for the connections and the experience which you will not find online, in which case maybe it is worth it. I'm not going to give you a definite answer. I rarely do in my videos. But I hope that if you are at a point in your life right now asking this question, I could somehow help by sharing my experience and my thoughts. And if you're just watching this for fun, I sure hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, that's it for this week. If you had a good time, I'd appreciate a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't yet, and I'll see you again next week in the next video. Until then, goodbye.